be speaking with my daughter. She, so it's a treat for both of us to be here before you. And we're going to talk on restorative justice. And I'll talk about restorative justice primarily, I guess, nationally, internationally, and really in Santa Cruz County as well. Restorative circles are fairly new to the American tradition. I think around the 1990s they were introduced up in Canada with the Native Americans in Canada because of the mass incarceration of Native peoples. So what they've done up there was around 1900 bring in the Anglos and the natives of Canadians to non-Native Canadians to restorative circles, which have been used by Indians, Native American Indians, for many, many years to resolve conflict. Okay, so those are the origins around 1990. Let me give you a definition so you'll have the context for it. Okay, restorative practices are based on principles and processes that emphasize the importance of positive relationships as central to building community and repairing relationships when harm has occurred. Restorative practice of movement. Our restorative practices is a movement grounded in principles designed to create powerful relationships, which are central to building thriving communities and represents a paradigm shift that focuses on the harm done, rather than the rule broken. In the restoration of relationships. Restorative practice is a reflective practice that encourages personal responsibility, giving a voice both to the person harmed as well as the person who's caused the harm, and aids in the acceptance of cultural differences by offering an equitable process where all members of a community feel valued and heard, and in turn are more likely to bring their best self to the community. And so I have that definition and some handouts that we use, and Martine will go into how it's used in schools. I must say that it's fairly new in public education. It started back and the budgets for for mental health clinicians and people who are trained in restorative circles is limited. If you look at schools, not in our schools, it's a top priority, but if you look at schools, you got math, you got science, you got this, and so down at the bottom is restorative circles. But if you think about what's been happening in juvenile justice, we started this movement. I was in alternative education and started, as many of you know, doing alternative schools for many years. And so worked very closely with probation and law enforcement. Okay, so I'd say maybe even 20 years ago, there was that whole juvenile detention reform movement, okay, to say, look, mass incarceration of juveniles is not working, okay? What can we do differently, all right? So in Santa Cruz County, we looked at ways where I can expand school programs to support probation, because these kids, they were locked up. You had 60, when I used to go up there, they would have 60 to 75 students in juvenile hall, okay? Now there are probably 10 or 15. Okay, so where do they go? They got to go to a community school or back to Santa Cruz High or back to Harbor High. And so how do you deal with them? Some of the behaviors that they have not changed, but we realize that incarceration has not worked, okay? And so in California, the incarceration rate of juveniles has really plummeted. I think in 1997, what was the number? It was well over 100,000. I think 10, 15 years later, it was down to 40,000, something like that. So there's been a concerted effort to look at different ways to help support students in our schools. I'll stay with education, which I know. The other thing that has occurred is that there were significant numbers of Latinos and African Americans being suspended and expelled, off the charts, okay? And so what they did a few years ago was create a law that says and basically we're suspended for willful defiance, okay? So you're a little black kid, you come into school, you tell the teacher to F off, and you're gone, boom. Things have changed, okay? And that's where restorative circles come into play. And Martine will talk a little bit about that. It's not just, okay, you make a bad mistake, you're gone. It's how do we repair this harm with the teacher and you to make it work? We started that reform, the juvenile justice reform about 20 years ago, and then it's just been now migrating into schools around the whole socially emotional piece about restorative circles. I'll give you one example. We had a school in Watsonville on Airport Boulevard. It was called Watsonville Community School, okay? And, you know, it was a tough school because there were a lot of gang-involved students there. Mostly Norteños, Serenos were afraid to come over there. And it was a dilapidated facility because we couldn't afford a new facility at that time, okay? So we spent 10 years building a new school on Airport, okay? This was on Freedom, we were on Airport. And it's a beautiful school. If you're ever out there and want to take a tour, you know, I would encourage you. But at the old school, which was dilapidated, and I probably had not as trained teachers as I'd like to have, the suspensions for Latinos was quite high, okay? And so we moved into a brand new facility, and we institute restorative circles to fidelity. I mean, when I say fidelity, Martine will talk about what that means, where you really value all of the individuals in that circle and don't give lip service to the person harmed and the person who's done the harm, you know? So what I can say today is that with this practice, the suspensions at that new program, the facility probably helps because it's a great, beautiful facility, and you come there, Santa Cruz, you go there, you want to go there, you want to teach there, you want to be there, and so do the kids.
It's awesome.
It is.
It is, you know, it's good. You'll be like, oh man, it's really, but the kids haven't changed, but the suspension rate has plummeted, and the expulsion rate is non-existent there because of, I would say, two things: restorative circles and also the facility. I mean, but I would say restorative circles and justice is a big part because you teach kids who may or may not have communication skills because they never were, some weren't taught the communication skills, and you know, these are traumatized, many of the kids are traumatized, neglected, and abused, and they haven't been raised with that skill set that maybe you and I have. I'll just take my time, I'll give Martine enough time. So that's how the genesis became, you know, with the County Office of Education. And we have 19 different schools throughout the county, and we were trying to create fidelity at all 19 schools. That said, a comprehensive school like Harbor High, I see Patty here, or C.O.E, or maybe Santa Cruz, it's a struggle trying to develop these circles to fidelity because of all the different, I don't want to say chaos, but the different things going on in a school of, 1,000 students or whatever. But I know that LA Unified has spent millions on restorative circles. Oakland Unified has spent millions on restorative circles. And it's important now because one of the things that the governor did when he changed how schools got funded, school climate expulsions and suspensions are part of their accountability plan, okay? So as a county superintendent, I can come in and say, look, you got too many suspensions, too many expulsions, and the school's climate sucks, or vice versa, it might be great. But we look at this data now, and they're evaluated, schools are evaluated on that data now, which they weren't in the past. They could suspend, 100 kids and no one would care. Now you suspend 100 kids, we're going to shine a spotlight on your practices and say, what are you doing to keep these kids in school? So I'm going to stop right there because and then let Martine talk about how it's being implemented at one of our schools.
I was saying when I first came in, I love restorative justice. I fell in love with restorative justice as soon as I started at the County Office of Education in 2004, I think. And then I began overseeing a restorative justice program in student services in about 2006. And I think just to sort of piggyback on what was already said, what restorative justice has looked like at the county office has been really a wonderful transition from taking referrals, which is how our program still runs in student services, to now with this new opportunity to embed the concept of restorative justice into the schools. So the program that we have at the County Office of Education is called Teen Peer Court. I'm not sure if anybody's heard of Teen Court other than Brian, our fabulous partner for all these years.
Thanks to him, we've heard of it.
Oh, good. Yes. And so teen court is what was the first thing I was exposed to in terms of restorative justice. And fresh out of UCSC with a legal studies degree, I was thrilled because it was looking at doing things differently. And it was purposely designed to interrupt that school to prison pipeline. And teen peer court still exists, and it's evolving now to incorporate the new research and the new evidence, which is around the restorative practices, restorative circles. So just briefly about teen court, and then I'll take you to the evolution of where we are at C.O.E. schools. So teen court, we get referrals from Watsonville PD, we get referrals from probation. Lower level misdemeanor, minor felony wobble type cases. Usually petty theft, under the influence. I actually just came from a teen peer court right before our meeting here today, and this young man was driving without a license in a hit and run. So, you know, instead of our probation department putting them sort of A, you do this crime, you get this punishment, and that always will equal C, it's saying they're going to divert the cases. And it really goes along with that history that was described in terms of the movement for diversion. And we're one of the diversion options there. And so teen court has a presiding judge that follows a script. We have teen attorneys that are trained, and it empowers the teenagers to be the leaders of the courtroom. We're there to support them, but it's teen run. It's just what it says. It's a full hearing with teenagers running it. There's a peer jury, and the jury members we do go over in detail what restorative justice is. And just briefly, to kind of remind you and familiarize you with it, we really talk about it to the students as being holistic, looking at crime as a wound that has a need to be healed, and looking at restoring balance. That if we had a traditional punishment, that it doesn't necessarily mean something to the kids, and it's not going to change their behavior. But we need to take into account that they should be held accountable for what their mistake was, whatever their decision was. There's an accountability component of it. That as they design their sentence or their disposition for the young person, that they look at community protection. There's actually harm that does happen to communities when somebody does something that has an impact on neighbors or impact on other students in the school or wherever it may happen. And then also looking at this third arm, which is what I think is really powerful about restorative justice, which is competency development. What is already going well with this young person, and how can we identify that and support them so that they are now redirected in a way that's going to improve outcomes for their lives. So that's the teen court model that I've run and known for probably 15 years now, and is still existing. But as Michael mentioned earlier, what happened was there was this really wonderful opportunity to shift our program from being solely a court-based model to start to embed it into the schools. And this was something that I in student services have really wanted to do for many years, but it's challenging. I think there's so many layers to it, whether it be a comprehensive school setting with one teacher interested, or a different alternative setting but not quite all on board. With the closing of Watsonville Community School and the opening of C.O.E. schools and the interest of the staff having been exposed to professional development and elements of restorative justice, and then I think what our key ingredient was for us in student services, and that's just a different department from Alt Ed, is how we can support them with facilitation and expertise in what restorative justice is. And I think I want to really highlight that, because if I go back to my first case that we had at C.O.E. schools, which was a young man who had been with C.O.E. and with the students for maybe almost 4 years, it was his senior year, amazing relationship and rapport with the staff, gets almost into a near fight, and at the old school would likely have been transferred. And that's it, you're done, A plus B equals C. And so with this new shift, we were able to come in and facilitate the circle process. And just to sort of really highlight the trauma, this young man sat in his chair in a fetal position the entire time. He couldn't even sit up straight, or, it was very uncomfortable. And the only time he did look up was when the director of the school, nearly in tears, said, I care about you. I care so much about you. I thought I would see you graduate from this school, and I don't want to transfer you. And she's in near tears. And he looks up, and he's upset, and it really gave a chance to have what I think a traditional disciplinary role of a staff person to also heal. And that to me was really it was magic. Because I feel that we forget that there's relationships involved with the students and the teachers, particularly in Alt Ed, and those they're their rocks often because of all the trauma in their lives, but they too have emotions when things happen. And so that was one of the first circles that we had at Sequoia schools. And I brought a little bit of data because I thought it would be helpful to hear, but now, just to sort of highlight the data from earlier, there was 8 fights at the Watsonville Community School site the year it closed. And then the first year there were 2 sites at Sequoia schools, and this year, now coming up nearly to the end of the school year, there has not been one physical altercation at that school site. Very little graffiti, very little things that have happened in terms of instances. And then, you know, I think one of the other pieces I will just sort of highlight in terms of our transition is, yes, the staff, us being able to support and facilitation and supporting that, but also building the teachers' awareness about it. It's a shift, and I think that is something to highlight because it's different. You're sort of removing a power dynamic that's long been held by many of the staff in terms of, I have control of this classroom, you can't do this. And for example, there was a recent instance that happened at the Sequoia schools where these 2 girls nearly got into it, and they kind of do it in front of the teacher, and instead of the teacher, you know, having an opportunity to say like, hey, no, out of the class, you know, their sentence or their outcome, their disposition was to go and have break with the teacher, have tea together, and figure out how to get along. I mean, so you're kind of letting go of the fact that, you know, maybe they should be, you know, what you would think traditionally, okay, you almost get in a fight, you should probably get suspended, there has to be an apology letter to the, I mean, you're letting go of this traditional kind of understanding of what punishment is, and you're looking at healing. And the circle process is, and, you know, I'll just sort of end kind of in knowing that there may be questions, but the circle process is just that, it's in the form of a circle. There's a talking stick. It really honors the tradition of the Native Americans that have brought this model. And it allows sort of healing amongst the students, amongst the teachers, amongst the teens that are leaders in the school who are participating, and helps come up with just really unique and very appropriate and pointed outcomes that are going to improve the lives of the students with those sort of 3 elements that were described in terms of the pillars of what restorative justice is. So you can tell I'm a fan. I love it. I think I've seen it firsthand. I think it's fantastic. And the students in the community are better off because of it, in my opinion. So I'm always happy to talk about it. Thanks for having us. Yeah.
I have some handouts. You know, we can, you know, but we'll take a few questions if you like. Yes, ma'am.
I didn't hear anything about parent involvement. Is there parent involvement and parent kind of coaching on this, which I think would be...
Go ahead, Martine.
Okay, we have for our model, we have an intake with the parent to explain the process so they understand what's going to be happening. For us, in terms of our model, they also have to waive their students' rights because it's going to be amongst teenagers, right? So they have a confidentiality kind of agreement that they have to let go of. So we do inform them that way. At Sequoia schools, you know, they have been really working on trying to embed and embrace the parents in the model, whether it be through their ELAC processes, as the students come in. The parents are often very much in touch with the staff at the school sites because it's like that in terms of the relationships that they have. They're small, they're calling on a regular basis. In terms of the actual circle process, we've had it as mostly the students being empowered, but as parents, because it sometimes changes the dynamic. If the parent is there, the student may not feel, or the young person may not feel open enough to share or ask questions. So we ideally have it as a student sort of center, but if the parent feels to have a role, we'll have the parent participate in the circle as well, without them going into like, son, you did, you know, which happens. I mean, it's happened before, but that would be time.
So what I'd like to know is what findings you have in terms of recidivation. How does this prevent people from doing the same thing?
Suspension rates have plummeted. Expulsion rates are non-existent almost. Fights are non-existent. I can only use a microcosm. Because it's such an infancy stage, you know, and it's not widespread throughout California. I mean, it's only at a very few school districts. Right. And even those school districts may only have certain pilots in their district, because it does take training. You know, and also, when Martine talked about professional development, you have to reorient teachers. Okay, because you're a teacher in a large urban school. You're used to force. Man. You don't. Boom. It's black and white. Boom. So you even have to re-educate a teaching staff. But I can say anecdotally, it's very powerful and very effective, but I think again because it's only in its infancy stages and not widespread, I think that I don't have any empirical data for you.
I have a little bit of data just because of our probation, because it's from the probation model, the adjudicated youth, that we actually have a very low recidivism rate. Usually always less than 10% on an annual basis. And that's just looking at like a crime that was committed and tracked through our recidivism process in the probation department.
Is the restorative justice model in play at the juvenile hall outside of school-related activities?
We do not do fidelity run a restorative circle at juvenile hall. It would be run through probation.
Do you notice a trend among the students that you usually deal with? Like, do you notice like a trend in like the background of those students, like socioeconomic income levels, you know, their upbringing or anything like that? Do you notice a trend with the people?
Well, I think because the population we work with, most of our students come from low income, lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So the ones that we do run, it would be a lower socioeconomic level. I don't answer your question on that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
How you would imagine scaling this up over time? What are some of the things that would have to happen? Do you see any of that happening? Any way that communities can help spread the
Well,
word?
I think you have a trustee right here. I think, in my opinion, you know, the community has a lot of power, okay? You don't know how much power school board trustees have, and I think it's an unkept secret. You know, they hire superintendents, okay? Hey, look, I work with a lot of superintendents, principals, and some don't even have a clue about what restorative justice is. So you ask me, how do we create a model? I know that we are going to elect a new state superintendent in a couple of weeks, or you know, this year. It's got to be a priority. You have to, and you have to understand there's been so much focus on academics or whatever else it may be with No Child Left Behind that the social emotional piece has been left aside in public education. We're just trying to rebuild that right now. But it takes a redesigning of the whole school system or a whole district. And it has to have a visionary leader to redesign that, because a teacher who teaches biology, let's say at Santa Cruz Valley High School, it may be, and yet there's some harm in his classroom, may have no clue on how to address it unless he or she is trained.
I can't resist just suggesting, as you're retiring from your current job, the role of the champion of within a profession who is at the cutting edge of new approaches that can speak peer-to-peer, say around the state, getting the idea, and will have the trust and the trust and credibility with their peers. Is there a place for that kind of?
There could be. You know, I spend a lot of my time, you know, whatever free time I have, really looking at issues around equity, especially for African Americans. And I haven't taken on the issue of, you know, restorative, which includes some restorative stuff as well. But that's when we've been doing equity seriously, the County Office of Education. But you know, there should be. You're right. You know, but I will lobby the next state superintendent to really. And we should lobby, you know, Mark Stone or Bill Monning as well, to put out state funds. The state's, you know, flush in revenue right now. Target, you know, restorative practice in schools. So it's not a top priority, but unless we make it a top priority, which school board trustees can.
Especially combined with the data that you were talking about, when they start tracking that, this is the answer.
Yeah, they feel more connected to school, they're going to come, there's going to be higher ADA, or they're not going to be suspended, they're not out of school. And just one other thing to mention in terms of impact, that often when a crime happens on a school site, there's, for example, one of the students was caught with a knife, then they're going to call law enforcement. Law enforcement might also have, so it's sort of the dual punishment, right? And one of the things that we've seen at C.O.E. is that when law enforcement is called, that the teachers or the staff will describe what the processes will be, and they won't file also, which is perfect. That's the beauty of it. They're not getting that school to prison type kind of continuum in place, which is really, really powerful in terms of relationships and ability to make a difference in potential trajectory of outcomes for somebody's life.
Yeah, you know, Craig, you see some schools and stuff at times, and what's your thought with the sheriff's office? I mean, and you've been, I must applaud, you know, the Santa Cruz County Sheriff for also taking a restorative approach with adults as well. You know, we're putting in new charter schools at the Roundtree facility in Watsonville, working in the jails down here, which is important. So you want to add anything to our discussion?
From a law enforcement perspective, we would use the process of diversion out of the criminal justice system as a separate stream into a restorative justice practice. We're all for it. I met with Joanne Allen when she had something to do that, and the resource base wasn't big enough we wanted to do what Watsonville was doing, and we couldn't feed into that.
We take direct referrals from Watsonville PD through their community.
Yeah, we would like to do that.
Grant, yeah, and they have a system set up now with probation for a checks and balance in terms of eligibility. So I think there is absolutely a way there.
Great.
Yeah.
A couple more, Ann, you had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to take it out of the school situation and give us some practical advice about workplace use of restorative justice.
Wow. I think,
I mean, is it, does it not work?
if you ask me that question, I think workplace and school culture are critical.
There's other harm comes to students in the school setting from bullying. And does this apply to that?
Also, this restorative justice is the intervention, right? So that's something has happened now, and we're doing a restorative justice circle. There's the movement is actually restorative practices, which is essentially doing a restorative circle-based model built into the classroom as the norm of culture and climate. So in terms of trying to prevent bullying, or also building that culture of trust and relationships and equity amongst each other, that's the hope, is to actually transform the school climate and culture that way. Cool. Ideally to sort of be the intervention to the bullying. And sometimes the students actually go, I feel like we need to have a circle about this, or something, they're like empowered now.
But the answer would be yes, it could be used for bullying as well.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, good, yes.
There will be an ed code violation, an automatic suspension as we know it, or as I understand it.
I may call law enforcement and cite a kid with a knife, gun, automatic, you're out of here. Okay, knife is questionable. I mean, it's not an automatic. I would probably cite the student to, to law enforcement, but then come and try to restore, repair, whatever that, I mean, it could be, most of the time the kids carry a knife because they're afraid.
That's right.
They're crossing, territory, gang territory, and they're afraid. So why are you gonna suspend a kid who brings a knife because he doesn't want to get his ass kicked? No. So we try to look at it differently.
Yeah. I was just curious if C.O.E is the only school currently that you're doing this restorative practice.
No, it's embedded into many of our alternative schools. But the African-American population in public education is less than 10%, okay? In Santa Cruz County, it might be less than 2%. But hell, they're suspended a lot more, the ratio could be 20%. You got 2% kids, but and that's statewide.
It sounds like you're just working at the secondary level at this point.
That's what we're doing, you're right.
At least middle school,
Absolutely. The goal is to keep the student in school. I want to thank you for having us.
Well, thank you so much.